Okay, welcome everyone to the second virtual event in our Women's Wellness Week series this year. Our topic tonight is supporting friends, family, and colleagues through infertility and miscarriage. And feel free to type questions into the chat, and throughout the whole event, I'll monitor it, but we'll have a formal Q&A at the end of the event. Okay, so before we dive into this discussion, I just want to share that all of tonight's presenters are part of the Women's Health Research and Action Center, or WHRAC. WHRAC is a new nonprofit working to advance equity in women's health through research, advocacy, and community care. If you'd like to support their work, you can sign up for their newsletter on their website and follow them on social media. And their presentation includes QR codes to make it easy to connect. Now, let me introduce our speakers. Leah Chapman is a public health researcher, advocate, and nonprofit leader driven by lived experience and a commitment to health equity. After years of navigating infertility and undiagnosed endometriosis, she founded WHRAC to center the voices and needs of those often overlooked in women's health. She brings over a decade of experience in health policy research with a focus on reproductive justice, access to care, and systems-level solutions. Emma Richardson is the Director of Health Programs at Special Olympics Washington, the Research Strategy Advisor for WHRAC, and a Master of Public Health candidate at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She has over 7 years of experience leading programs and research initiatives to advance equity for underserved communities, with expertise in strategic planning, community-engaged research, and data translation. Her passion for women's health deepened after her own experience with miscarriage, which highlighted the gaps many face in accessing care and reinforced her commitment to addressing the gender data gap. Today, she works to promote inclusive practices that elevate women's voices and support more equitable health outcomes. And Rosemary Lisi is an undergraduate student at the University of Houston, pursuing a Bachelor of Science in Public Health. Her passion for women's health stems from her own experience living with endometriosis and the challenges she faced in obtaining a diagnosis. She currently serves as the Social Media and Research Communications Manager for WHRAC and has also been active with Planned Parenthood and grassroots lobbying efforts at the Texas Capitol. Through her work, Rosemary is committed to expanding education, advancing digital advocacy, and ensuring that women feel seen, heard, and supported in the pursuit of health and wellness. And with that, I'll turn it over to our speakers.
Great. Thank you so much, Jess. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today and for participating in this workshop called Supporting Friends and Family and Colleagues Through Infertility and Miscarriage. So again, my name is Leah Chapman. I'll be co-presenting today with my colleagues Emma Richardson and Rosemary Lisi. We're here on behalf of the Women's Health Research and Action Center, or WHRAC. So we are a very small group today, so it's just a few of us, but that's really exciting because then we'll be able to interact and engage even more. So our hope is to create this very safe feeling interactive space. And we want to create a compassionate space where we can learn together and we can practice responses for our loved ones who may be experiencing very challenging journeys of infertility and loss. Before we dive into today's content, I just wanted to share a little bit more about the nonprofit that we represent, WHRAC. I serve as the executive director and I founded WHRAC, and our mission is to bridge science with compassion and close gaps in care for women's health. And we do this in a couple of key ways. So we're primarily a research organization. We lead research on infertility, endometriosis, PMDD, pregnancy loss, and other reproductive and hormonal health conditions. We also create tools and resources like policy briefs and reports that turn this research into action for communities and for advocates and organizers. And then we also build community support initiatives. So one of my favorite philanthropic initiatives that we have is called the Cards of Comfort campaign. And it's where people can host card writing nights and they can create handwritten notes and offer encouragement to those experiencing pregnancy loss. So we'd love for you to connect with us. Our website and our Instagram are on this slide. So if you just scan the QR codes, it'll take you directly to those pages. I also want to acknowledge that the content that we'll be discussing today is going to cover a lot of sensitive topics. It's going to include infertility, it'll include miscarriage and pregnancy loss, and even neonatal loss. So it's important that you take care of yourself during our time together. If you need to turn off your camera at any point, we understand. If you need to step away, if you need to skip a breakout activity, please do so. Your well-being always comes first. And again, we want this to feel like a supportive space. So why does this workshop matter? Let's just start off by looking at the numbers. It becomes really clear how widespread the experiences of infertility and loss are. So 1 in 6 people worldwide experience infertility at some point in their lives, according to the World Health Organization, and then up to 1 in 4 pregnancies will end in miscarriage. But even with crazy statistics like these, infertility and pregnancy loss are often hidden, they're often stigmatized, and they're incredibly isolating experiences. So that's why it's so important to have conversations like this where we can both learn and practice supportive responses. It's so incredibly important. I think it's important to keep in mind that these are not abstract numbers. These numbers represent your friends, your colleagues, your family members, probably people on this call, and they deserve compassion and understanding with their journeys. So here's a quick look at what we'll cover today. So section 1 is going to go over just the basics of infertility and miscarriage, such as important definitions. And then in section 2, we're going to look at some real life scenarios and how you can respond. And then section 3, we're going to share some practical tools that you can take with you after tonight. And then we'll wrap up with section 4 and we'll discuss resources and do reflections and have time for questions. And then also throughout, depending on how many people come in, we had some breakout sessions planned, but if we stick with the number that we have now, we may not even need to break out into breakout groups. We can possibly just do everything together here as one group. So we'll just see how that goes. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my amazing colleague, Rosemary, who is gonna guide us into section 1.
Thank you so much, Leah, for getting us started with that. Hi, everyone. My name is Rosemary Lisi. To begin section 1, we're going to discuss some key basics for understanding infertility and miscarriage, what they are, how they affect people, and why these experiences deserve greater compassion and awareness. If you would like to access any of the citations for this section, you can scan the QR code right here, and I'll give everyone just a moment to do so. So when we talk about infertility and miscarriage, there are 2 major areas of impact that immediately come to mind: mental health and financial burden. Both infertility and pregnancy loss are emotionally complex experiences that deeply affect mental well-being. Studies show significantly higher rates of depression, anxiety, and PTSD, especially when people feel isolated or unsupported during their journey. In addition to this, the stigma and silence surrounding reproductive loss often make it hard for people to reach out and receive the support that they need. So the isolation can take a serious toll on mental health, which further intensifies feelings of grief, shame, or loneliness. The financial toll is also incredibly significant. On average, one IVF cycle costs between $15,000 and $25,000. Because of the gender data gap, we don't actually have comprehensive data on the true costs of IVF and the related treatments. So what's shown here is just an estimate. It doesn't account for additional costs like medications, supplements, acupuncture, or any mental health support, all of which people may rely on during their treatments. And remember, it often takes multiple IVF cycles to achieve a live birth. And so for many families, that means that the total cost can climb easily up to $100,000 or more. And because most people either don't have insurance coverage or only have partial coverage, they end up paying much of this out of pocket. So the key takeaway here is that these aren't just medical conditions, they carry deep emotional and financial costs, underscoring the need for both compassion and understanding. So traditionally, infertility has been defined as 12 months of unprotected sex without conception, but that definition is quite narrow. So today we use a more inclusive definition that recognizes LGBTQ plus family building pathways, single parents by choice, and medical causes of infertility, such as cancer treatments. Globally, infertility affects 1 in 6 people, and common causes include endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, unexplained infertility, and age-related decline. It's also important to remember that infertility is not just a women's health issue. Male factor infertility does account for at least 30% of cases. So this is not solely a woman's problem. It affects both men and women, and often both partners play a role. There are a few different fertility treatment options available, and everyone's journey looks a little bit different. So there are ovulation induction medications, and these help people who don't ovulate regularly or potentially at all to release an egg. It's often the first line of treatment and can be used on its own or before procedures like an IUI. So IUI is intrauterine insemination, and this involves placing sperm directly into the uterus during ovulation. This bypasses the cervix and gets sperm closer to the egg, which improves the chances of fertilization. Additionally, there's also IVF, or in vitro fertilization. This is probably the one you've heard most commonly. This is when eggs are retrieved from the ovaries, fertilized in a lab, and then the embryo is transferred into the uterus. Some other assisted reproductive technologies that are important to note are the use of donor eggs, donor sperm, or surrogacy. These can either be used alone or in combination with IVF to support complex fertility needs or alternative family building pathways. Fertility journeys vary widely from person to person, so there is no right way or guaranteed treatment. And it's important to emphasize that infertility is a disease of the reproductive system and not a personal failure. So before we continue, I just want to pause to acknowledge again that we are discussing emotionally sensitive and very heavy information. So please take care of yourself in whatever ways feel best as we progress through these next few slides, as we will be discussing miscarriage and miscarriage management. So a miscarriage is the loss of a pregnancy before 20 weeks, and neonatal losses would be after that point. A single miscarriage does not necessarily mean infertility, but people who experience recurrent pregnancy loss are often evaluated and treated within fertility care, and they may undergo IVF or any of those other medical interventions we discussed prior. There are 3 main medical approaches to managing miscarriage, and this just depends on what feels safest and most appropriate for each individual. So there's expectant management, which is when the body passes pregnancy tissue naturally over time. There's medication management, and this method uses medication to help the body pass tissue more quickly and safely. And then there's surgical management, so a DNC. It's a short outpatient procedure in which the cervix is gently dilated and the uterus is cleared under medical supervision. So physically, miscarriage often involves cramping, bleeding, and significant hormonal changes. Emotionally, it can bring deep grief and distress, and this is only intensified by the sudden drop in estrogen and progesterone and by the silence that too often surrounds this experience. Another thing to talk about is the impact on partners and friends. Infertility and miscarriage have far-reaching and lasting effects that extend beyond just the individual. They impact partners, friends, grandparents, and other family members in very powerful ways. So partners might feel helpless or sidelined, or they might feel pressured to stay strong throughout the experience. And another thing that's important to note with partners is that they often grieve differently, and so this can lead to misunderstandings or conflicts within the relationship. Friends may struggle to know what to say, or they may unintentionally withdraw themselves out of fear of saying the wrong thing. And this can only deepen the isolation that the person experiencing miscarriage or infertility would be feeling. And they might also carry survivor's guilt if they conceive easily. Grandparents are often overlooked, but they're also deeply impacted. They grieve the loss of hoped for grandchildren, and they also have the pain of watching their children suffer. So it's just emotionally heavy all the way around. So these ripple effects remind us that reproductive loss is a shared experience, and supporting someone means also recognizing their wider circle of people who may be affected.
And with that, I'll pass it over to my wonderful colleague Emma, who will take us into the next section.
Thank you so much, Rosemary, for that great overview. And we do acknowledge that this is heavy, and that was a wonderful description. So now that we're equipped with some foundational knowledge, let's apply it to action. This section will be about real scenarios that you may encounter and how to respond with compassion and support. We'll walk through specific situations as a group and give you practical language that you can use, and we hope you can carry with you through your day-to-day. We're going to start with an activity. I'd love for everyone who's on to take out a piece of paper and a pencil, or even your notes app on your phone would work great. And this is just for yourself. I would love for everyone to write down how they would respond to a friend who just shared with you that they are starting IVF after struggling to conceive for about a year. What would you say to them? Take a moment and jot that down and set it aside, and we will come back to it later. Reminder, this is a couple reminders. This is just for you. And this is a safe space. If you're going to make a mistake in this arena, we would rather you do it here and learn from it, and then be able to go out into the world confidently following. Give everyone a moment to do that. All right, so no matter what type of reproductive loss someone is experiencing, everyone's needs are different. The best way to support your loved one is to have an open conversation with them about what they need. You know your loved one best, and this presentation we are providing guidelines and a foundation and a starting point for how to begin, but we are not making up rules or telling you exactly how to respond. The most meaningful support will come from asking them authentically and directly, how can I best support you right now? And then truly listening to their answer. I will now hand it off to my colleague Leah to cover how to respond to infertility specifically.
Okay, so we're gonna talk through some real life scenarios, and we're gonna start with infertility and then later progress to loss. So when someone shares that they are going through infertility, it can feel hard to know what to say. I completely get it. People freeze, or they'll immediately resolve to problem solving. That's a common response. But these are a couple of examples of some supportive things that you could say instead. So first, thank you for sharing this with me. I listed this one first because I love this one. It really acknowledges the vulnerability that it takes to open up about infertility. It reassures the person going through infertility that they didn't make you feel uncomfortable. And it also just kind of shows them that they can trust you with this very sensitive information. Secondly, thank you for trusting me with this. You could also say something like, that sounds so hard. I'm here to listen. That's a very validating response. And then finally, is there a way that I can support you right now? That's a bit of a more proactive response. And then some things of what not to say. Even if these are well-intentioned, they can really be hurtful. So first of all, I hear this one all the time. Oh, just relax, don't stress, it will happen. This implies that infertility is caused by stress, which is not true. It minimizes the medical condition of infertility and the emotional challenges that people face with infertility. Another thing not to say, why don't you just adopt? Adoption can be a wonderful option for some people, but it can feel very dismissive when someone is still processing their own family building journey. And quite honestly, it's really none of their business. Offering unsolicited diets or supplements, I also hear this one a lot. Have you tried this supplement or have you tried doing this diet? So this suggests that the person's doing something wrong, or that they're not trying hard enough, and it can really increase shame for that person. And then finally, trying to make light of the situation. So I've heard things like, oh my gosh, you're so lucky, kids are so much work, or here, take some of my kids. I know that these jokes are meant to lighten the mood, but they really can make the person feel like their pain is not being taken seriously. So here's a few supportive things that you might say to someone who is going through IVF specifically as part of their infertility journey. So again, always a safe bet. Thank you for sharing that with me. I love this second bullet. So something like, this must be a really big step. How are you feeling about it? And the reason I love this one is because it shifts the focus back to the person with infertility, and it gives them the space to share their emotions instead of you trying to fill in the blanks. Something simple like I'm rooting for you, that can be simple but effective, and it doesn't put any pressure on any type of outcome. And then finally, if you want to even offer something specific like, can I bring you a meal on a hard day? Or is it okay if I check in with you via text throughout your cycle? I would love to, check in with you and stay up to date. So offering this specific support just shows that you're really there for them just beyond generic words. And then let's talk about some things for what not to say. This first one, I actually just heard someone just said this to me a couple of weeks ago. So I was at the dermatologist and I was sharing with her as part of my treatment plan that I was going through IVF. It was a necessary piece of information for her to know. And her response was, "Oh, that's so exciting," which was very invalidating. And I know she meant well, but IVF is not exciting. It is a last resort after years of struggle and years of heartbreak and exhaustion trying to build your family. So again, while it's well-meaning, calling it exciting minimizes the exhaustion and the heartbreak that this process takes on somebody. Also, I hear this one a lot, at least you have this option. This can come across as really dismissive, and it also ignores all of the financial and the physical and the emotional toll that IVF takes. And then finally, my friend did IVF and now has twins. Sometimes sharing success stories is helpful, but this is not the context of when it would be okay to do so. It can really feel like pressure when you first share with someone that you're going through IVF, and it kind of makes it seem like IVF guarantees a baby, which it does not. And I just want to pause here to re-emphasize a point from the previous slide. IVF is not an exciting treatment. It is physically grueling, it is emotionally draining, and it is often financially devastating because, as Rosemary discussed earlier, most people in the United States don't have insurance coverage for IVF or for any type of infertility treatment, or if they do have coverage, it's not sufficient coverage. So when someone shares that they're going through IVF, the most supportive response is just simply to acknowledge how difficult it is, rather than romanticizing it or assuming that it guarantees a happy ending. Let's talk about the IVF transfer. So this is the day that an embryo gets placed into the uterus. So it's essentially when all of the shots, all of the appointments come together. It's a huge emotional milestone, and it feels like everything has led up to that day. And then after the transfer comes what's called the 2-week wait. So it's usually between 10 to 14 days until the time that you can take a pregnancy test. And so that stretch of time is torture. It's, every day it's just this mix of hope with dread and uncertainty, and it can just be really hard to sit with. So how can you show up for someone during an IVF transfer? I think one of the most powerful things that you can do is to just simply acknowledge the significance of the day. So you could send them a text message that morning that says something like, I know today is a huge day. I'm rooting for you and I'm thinking of you. You could offer gentle distractions or support during the 2-week wait by offering to do something like go for a walk or drop off a meal, or you could ask them if it's okay if you just send check-in texts throughout the 2-week wait. And then on the pregnancy test day itself, sending a simple message that says something like, I'm thinking of you today. That shows a lot of support without adding any type of pressure. Don't ask if the transfer worked. They will share that with you if they want to. And then lastly, just keep in mind, it's always important to avoid comments like, just relax, don't worry, it's gonna work, because it might not. All right, I'll pass it back to Emma.
Thanks so much, Leah. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about miscarriage. And as a very gentle reminder, please feel free to turn off your camera if needed. Heavy topic coming soon. So let's start with what works best to say when someone's just experienced a miscarriage. I'm so sorry for your loss, is our first one, because it's both simple, easy to remember, and it also acknowledges that this is a loss and that this is grief that someone is experiencing and that is very real. While the loss is complex, it is still a grieving process. The next one I would say is, this must be so hard. I'm here for you. This validates their experience and offers your presence and support. I'm thinking of you and holding space for your grief. This communicates that you recognize their need to grieve, and again, validates the fact that grieving is a necessary part of this healing process following a pregnancy loss. And remember to offer specific support. We talked about this earlier, but offering things like, can I bring you a meal this week, can be a lot more helpful than let me know if you need anything, because it takes the responsibility of choice off of the person who is trying to focus on their grieving and healing. All right, let's discuss what not to say. So similarly to infertility, these are all often well-meaning statements and come from a well-intentioned place, but can be damaging. The first one that I've experienced, and I'm sure others who've experienced miscarriage have heard before, are, at least you can get pregnant. This is incredibly dismissive and minimizes loss, and also ignores the reality that that person may very likely be experiencing a great amount of fear and anxiety about getting pregnant again, if they can get pregnant again, or if their next pregnancy will be viable. It wasn't meant to be, or everything happens for a reason. These kinds of phrases attempt to assign meaning to pain and can also feel dismissive. My friend had one, then went on to have 3 kids. Sharing other success stories doesn't comfort someone who is in acute grief. It shifts focus away from their experience. And please never say, you'd understand if you had kids. This could invalidate their loss even more and suggest that they weren't already a parent to the pregnancy they lost. And everyone is different. Some people don't assign that identity to their pregnancy, but some do. And we don't want to assume either way. The key is to acknowledge their grief, offer concrete support, and avoid trying to find silver linings or fix their grief. It's grief. It doesn't get fixed, unfortunately. It lessens with time. And as their loved one, all we can do is hold their hand through it. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about challenging scenarios. So I find that understanding what to say when someone is going through a difficult time, like an IVF transfer, infertility, or miscarriage, can drive more empathy in myself to be able to respond and understand different scenarios more adequately. So applying that first to baby showers, which can be incredibly difficult because they're centered entirely around babies and parenting and identity around children and parenting, which can intensify these feelings of grief and can be very triggering. So if you are planning a baby shower and someone you love is experiencing reproductive loss of any kind, saying something like, we'd love for you to come, but completely understand if it's too hard right now, can be really powerful and let them know that they're seen and they have your blessing to stay back if they need to. You can offer alternative ways to celebrate by offering a one-on-one visit instead, and putting the ball in their court and allowing them to decide how they may want to celebrate you. This is also very important. Please don't guilt trip them if they decline. They are protecting their emotional well-being, and it's not a rejection of you or your joy. It's their self-care and allows them to show up more authentically joyful for you when they're ready. Okay, yeah. Next challenging scenario might be the holidays. So these can be particularly tough. They're a constant reminder of family and children, and social media is absolutely filled with pregnancy and parenting content. There are awkward or hurtful questions from relatives, like when are you having kids? And feelings of isolation when traditions don't fit someone's experience. So how can you show up for your friend or family member during the holidays? You can be mindful that these gatherings might feel painful. You can check in privately, ask how they're feeling about the holidays this year. You can create inclusive traditions that aren't centered just around kids and families. And don't put pressure on someone to attend, similarly to baby showers. Give them space to say no. Just some practical tips. You could send a text on Mother's Day or Father's Day or Christmas morning with something simple like thinking of you and sending you love today, or invite them to an alternative get-together like a coffee or a walk, or even volunteering. I think that's a great idea. Just outside the family-heavy context can be really helpful. Okay. Next slide, please. Thank you. We're going to shift gears a little bit to talk more about what you may encounter just day to day during the work week. So water cooler conversations and office small talk, whether on a Zoom meeting or in person. One problem that we see a lot is small talk can often center around kids and parenting, which can leave people out and make them feel even more isolated and invisible and unseen. So some practical tips for inclusivity: rotate the icebreakers beyond family life. Try asking questions like, what's a book or show you're enjoying? If you're a manager, try to set norms about inclusive check-ins and lead by example. And as colleagues, we can be mindful not only to share kid-related anecdotes. There's so much more to all of us than children or our relationship to specifically our family. We are multidimensional people. The key message here is inclusion in the workplace means recognizing that not everyone is a parent and not everyone wants to be defined by that relationship.
Another really challenging scenario is pregnancy announcements. So I think it's important to keep in mind that even when someone is truly happy for their loved one, hearing this kind of news, if you're going through infertility or loss, can still trigger grief because it's possible for grief and joy to exist side by side. So, whether you are the one sharing the news or whether you are supporting a friend or family who's about to share pregnancy news, here are some tips for sharing more compassionately. So, I personally really love to receive news via a text message or an email, not in person and not a phone call. A text or an email is best because it gives the person going through loss or going through infertility space to process this news more privately and to respond when they're ready on their terms. Really try to avoid surprising someone in a group setting. Never make a pregnancy announcement in a group setting because you just don't know what everybody's situation is in that group. It could end up being very hurtful. You might make someone feel pressured to perform joy that they don't actually feel in the moment, and that can cause a lot of grief and stress and anxiety. And honestly, it's not fair to anybody in that situation. It's not fair to the person sharing their news either. If you're the person sharing, you might acknowledge the sensitivity of the situation by saying something like, it was really important to me that I share this news with you directly because I know it could be hard to hear. Again, sharing it via text or email. And then also just make sure to give your loved one space. Don't expect immediate joy from them and don't expect an immediate response. They'll come to you when they're ready on their terms. So I think the bottom line is just to emphasize that how we share and how we receive big news like this, it can either deepen connection or it can unintentionally create distance. And we don't want that. So a little thoughtfulness can make a huge difference. So I want to share an example of a pregnancy announcement that shows how compassionate and how thoughtful this can be. So it's a text message, and just for some context, it's from one sister to another sister. And I'm going to read the whole thing because I think it's really beautiful. So, hi, so-and-so. I have some really difficult news to share. I'm pregnant. I'm so happy, but I'm equally filled with devastation knowing how difficult this will be for you and your partner's name. I wanted to share the news with you sooner rather than later, but I also wanted to emphasize that I want to give you as much space as you need to help you grieve and cope. There's no need to respond to this message or say anything right now. Please know that I'm here for you and I'm grieving alongside you with this news. I love you so much. Wow, that text captures so much. It is so honest. The acknowledgement of grief is incredible. The space given for the recipient to process this news. It's just an amazing model of how both grief and joy can coexist and how love can come through even in a potentially painful moment. So let's look at a very different example now. So this is a phone call. And by the way, these are all real examples. So this is a phone call where someone says, "Hi, so-and-so. I wanted to call and share the news that partner's name and I are expecting." So what's missing here is any acknowledgement of how this news might land for the other person. It also puts them on the spot since it's a phone call, and it makes them process this in real time with no space to process their emotions privately. Here's another example. So this one's a text message and it just says, "It's a girl," with a bunch of pink heart emojis. So the problem here is that it centers only excitement. It has no awareness for how the recipient might be in a very different emotional place. And for someone experiencing infertility or loss, this message can feel really jarring and even isolating. This last example is a text message that says, "I wanted to let you know that we are expecting baby number 3 in March. We have been thinking about you." This one is a little more nuanced. I think the person's intent here was good. They wanted to include their friend and acknowledge them and acknowledge their struggles. But I think the way that it's worded is still a little stingy. The mention of baby number 3 can kind of feel like rubbing salt in the wound for someone who may be struggling to have one baby. And then the phrase, "we've been thinking about you," it's a little odd to me. It feels a little vague or just kind of unfinished. There's no clear acknowledgement of, something like, "I know this might be very hard to hear." And it just doesn't fully communicate sensitivity that's needed in this moment. All right, so after looking at some of those more painful examples, let's ground ourselves in what does help. So I like this slide. It's just kind of a nice summary to sum up how you should respond to a painful experience. Um, so when someone shares hard news with you, I think there are really 3 key things to remember. First is to always validate their experience. Validate, validate, validate. Acknowledge their pain. Let them know that it matters. Saying something simple like, "I am so sorry that you're going through this. It sounds incredibly hard." That can make a world of a difference. Second, understand what they need, or at least try to understand what they need. That you could gently ask something like, "How can I best support you right now? Would you like some space? Or do you want me to just sit with you and listen and hold your hand?" That way you're not assuming anything, you're meeting them where they are. And then third, don't try to problem solve. Don't try to fix it. Infertility and miscarriage, like Emma shared, are grief experiences. They're incredibly complex problems with no quick solutions. So sometimes, again, the best support is to just sit with someone in their pain. So if your response honors these 3 pieces, validation, understanding, and not fixing, you're in the right starting place. Okay, so we've been talking a lot at you. We're gonna start our first breakout activity, and I think I saw that we have 6 people in here. So I think that is enough to do 2 breakout rooms of just 3 people each. 1, 2, 3, 4, oh, 5. Okay, well, one breakout room will have 2, one breakout room will have 3. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna give you a scenario, and then as a group, you're gonna answer a few discussion questions. So here's the scenario. You've been going through infertility for a year. Imagine you get a phone call from a friend who says, "Hey, we just got back from vacation. I was with my partner. We ate all these oysters and sardines, and they're aphrodisiacs. Anyway, I just took a pregnancy test, and guess what? I'm pregnant." And then later in the conversation, they add, "I really think, just being on vacation and relaxing, it really helped with getting pregnant. And don't worry, it's going to happen for you too." So in your breakout groups, I'd like you to talk through a couple of things. Number 1, what feels hurtful about this exchange? Number 2, how could it be reframed in a more sensitive way? And number 3, if a friend came to you upset by this, if they had just experienced this scenario, what could you say to comfort or support them? So as you're discussing, it might be helpful to have a spokesperson who's willing to either come off mute or type into the chat what you came up with in your breakout room. So go ahead and designate a spokesperson. And we'll give you a couple of minutes to discuss in small groups. There's no pressure, again, to have the perfect answer. The goal here is just to practice and reflect. So I am going to open the breakout rooms right now. All right, can everyone see my screen again?
Yeah.
All right. So does anyone want to put into the chat what their initial thoughts were? What felt hurtful about this exchange? Any ideas for how it could have been reframed to be more sensitive? And then maybe Jess or Jessica, if you want to monitor the chat, if anyone wants to put their initial thoughts, or come off mute if you're comfortable coming off mute. I think, we can certainly keep monitoring the chat, but I think just like, honestly, a really good summary, the number one thing that could have really helped this situation is just a text message instead of a phone call. I think there's still a lot of really bad things about this whole situation, unsolicited advice with the diet and relaxing and being on vacation. But even if this had just been a text message or an email, it could have been processed privately. So as we continue, feel free to enter your additional thoughts into the chat. We'll keep monitoring it throughout. Okay, so we are a little bit behind on time, but we'll pass it to Emma now for section 3, and we'll try to make up some time, as we move forward.
Thanks, Leah. I'll try to be quick. So moving into section 3, we're going to cover some more practical tools that you can hopefully take with you. These are strategies for showing up, using inclusive language, and supporting people over the long term and extended periods of time, not just the immediate aftermath of their struggle. So for supporting over time, why does this matter? Because grief and struggle don't end after a few weeks. I know we've kind of said this quite a few times and really drilled it in, but it's so true that grief is a long road and progress is not linear, and people often need support for a long time. It can be really helpful to be aware of anniversaries or due dates and holidays that can reopen wounds and be very triggering. And limiting feelings of isolation can only happen through building trust and maintaining safe relationships and spaces over months and years. So how can you show up? You can check in on those milestones like due dates and anniversaries and Mother's Day and Father's Day. Again, keeping it simple, like thinking of you today, acknowledging the ongoing journey by asking, how are you doing? How is everything going? And being consistent. Support matters so much more when it's steady and not just intense right after loss and then disappearing. Actions over words. Real care is shown over months and years, and again, not just in that immediate aftermath. It's really key that your sustained presence makes all the difference.
So I'd also like to talk about inclusive language. So I think one of the most powerful tools that we have in supporting others is our language and the words that we use. It can really reduce stigma and acknowledge the fact that there are many different experiences and pathways to family building. So I'm not going to read through all of these just for time purposes, but I think the one thing I really want to highlight on this slide is the term having kids. Instead of saying having kids, I really love the term building your family because it acknowledges that families are formed in so many different ways, not just through biological parenting. So instead of saying, from here on out, instead of saying, when are you having kids, which you should never say, you should never ask someone if they're having kids. So I'm glad I threw that tidbit in. But from here on out, say family building or building your family, not having kids. I'm sorry, I'm having some. There we go. So we went over some sample responses of support, but now let's talk about a few other ways to support loved ones going through infertility or loss. So sometimes it's the small, thoughtful gestures that make the biggest impact. I know when I started my IVF journey, my sisters put together a little care basket. So, things like a bracelet or a candle, a cozy blanket. It can just remind someone that they're not alone on their journey. But support's not only about things, it's also about presence. So asking people about key dates, like when's your transfer day, or when's your next big doctor's appointment? I would love to check in with you the night before. It just kind of shows people that you're walking alongside them throughout their journey. Something that I really like to do to help me remember this is to create calendar invites. So if someone says, "Oh, I have a really big doctor's appointment on the 28th," then on the 27th, I'll put something like, check in with so and so about their doctor's appointment tomorrow. And then that way I can send a text that says, "I know it's a big day tomorrow. I'm thinking of you." And I like to say something like, "If it's okay, I'll check in with you tomorrow to see how it went." I don't like when people say, "Let me know how it goes," because then it puts it back on me to have to keep you updated. So that's just another tip that I've learned along the way is, if it's okay, I'd love to check in with you tomorrow. All right. Practical help. So sometimes showing up with, again, a meal or coffee, or offering help with things like childcare if it's relevant, or pet care, running an errand, can be so helpful, especially during stressful times like the 2-week wait after an IVF transfer. Also making sure you celebrate the small wins. So finishing an IVF cycle or getting through a tough appointment. These are just moments worth acknowledging. Okay, so this was going to be a last breakout, but I think for just how small of a group we are and for the amount of time we have left, let's just go ahead and talk about scenario 1 together as a group. So for this scenario, it's going to be similar to the last breakout where we give you a scenario and you respond to prompts. So a close friend shares that they've had a miscarriage, and unfortunately, it's not their first. And they are being referred to a fertility specialist, and they just shared this with you. So, wow, that's some heavy news. What might you say in response? What are some examples of some support you could offer? So, we've just gone through this workshop. Everybody hopefully has some tools now to answer these discussion prompts. I really challenge you to throw an idea into the chat. And Jess or Jessica, if you wouldn't mind monitoring the chat. So, take a second, think of what you might say in response, and go ahead and put it into the chat. All right, anything in the chat yet? All right, everyone, don't be shy. It's a safe space. We're practicing. Unfortunately, this will happen at some point to everybody. We'll hear tough news. It might not be a miscarriage, but it will be tough news of some sort. And a lot of the tools that we've shared with you today can be applied to lots of difficult situations. Oh, we have someone in the chat. I'm so excited to see what you all have to say. All right.
One response is, "I am so sorry. I can't imagine how you are feeling. Thank you so much for sharing this with me. How can I best support you now?"
I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for that response. Oh, it looks like we had another one too.
There
Um,
is another one.
yeah.
"I'm so sorry about your loss. Let me know how I can be of help to you."
Yes, these are wonderful. The acknowledgement, the validation, beautiful way to start. I think asking how you can support is lovely. If you wanted to take it even one step further, you could say, instead of "let me know how to best support you," you could even say, "How can I best support you?" And then give some examples. You could say, "How can I best support you? Can I possibly gain some knowledge on some of the key dates throughout your journey so that I can make sure I can check in with you if you're comfortable?" So giving some examples like that could be another good next step. But these are wonderful. We have another one. "That's so awful. I can't imagine going through this. Let me send you dinner tonight." Oh, great. Beautiful one. Love that concrete offer. That's great. Okay, thank you all so much. Just we could keep chatting, but in terms of time, we'll keep moving. So I think as we begin to wrap up, we did want to share some resources. So Rosie, I think just for time purposes, I know Rosemary was going to share some resources, but since we're at time, I think what we'll do is we'll leave this up for a second if anybody wants to take a photo. And then in our follow-up email that we're going to be sending out, we'll be sure to include the resources as well. But keeping in mind that you only share these resources if they want you to share resources. Avoid fixing the situation by saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Have you heard of the Miss Foundation?" Like, just let them sit with their pain for a little bit, and then later on you can offer some support if they want it. Okay, so just as a final pause and reflect, I want you to return to what you wrote down at the beginning of this session when we gave you that scenario about somebody who had been experiencing infertility for a year and they were starting IVF. Think about what you wrote down before this workshop started, and now that you've attended this workshop, think about how your response might change. So it's dinner time. Hopefully everybody's gonna, maybe not Pacific time yet, but soon everybody will be eating dinner. So while you're eating dinner, pause and reflect and think about this. How would your response have changed now that you've done this workshop? Also think about, how are you gonna show up differently for your friends and family? And what's one simple step that you can take today or this week or this year to show support for someone on their journey? So I'll end there. We included our Instagram QR code and our website QR code in case anybody wants to connect with us. Our email, if anybody has any final questions, any lingering questions after the session. We also are going to include in that follow-up email to everybody who is registered this one pager that has some kind of reminders of what we talked about today. So some supportive responses examples and some concrete ways to show support. So everybody will be receiving that as well. We're at time. If you need to hop off, no problem. Otherwise, I can stay on a little bit late and take any questions that anybody has.
Thank you so much, Leah, Rosemary, Emma, and everyone who attended for participating and sharing your expertise and your energy and your thoughtfulness with this group. And thank you so much for providing this information to be shared with others who couldn't make it here today. With that, we'll end the recording and thank you all so much for attending.
Thanks. And yes, again, I can stay